Hi everyone, I'm David Stocker and I want to thank you for attending this session. I hope everybody's staying healthy and enjoying the conference so far. In this Looker at Home session, I'm going to share a conceptual architecture for building Looker data experiences to engage your users and drive data into their native workflows. I work at 4Mile Analytics, where I lead the software engineering practice. 4Mile is a data consultancy and Looker partner that specializes in building data experiences, so this is a topic that we're very passionate about. So let's get to it. Our agenda for this session is to describe 1. What's a data experience? How might it benefit your customer? And where to get started. 2. How to design a system that supports a broad range of experiences. 3. An example of how to apply this architecture. And finally, our key takeaways from using this approach with a Fortune 100 retailer. Okay, so let's get to it. Data experiences. I want to set the context by sharing, when I think of traditional BI experiences, I often think of rectangles. I have rectangular dashboards with smaller rectangular tiles. Each has a data viz inside. And that puts the burden on me, the data user, to make sense of what all this data is trying to tell me. What's the story? Data experiences allow us to overlay data in a deliberate way, that makes the story engaging and compelling, that connects the dots for the user. Data experiences also allow users to act on those insights within a single pane of glass. We're building applications that are both analytical and operational in nature. Looker 7 opened up a lot of really great capabilities for us developers and designers to deliver on this promise. We can now stitch together composable elements any way we want using native Looker objects so that we can deliver a whole range of different use cases. Looker is now positioned as a foundational analytical platform for building data experiences. It is so much more than traditional BI tools. So what I want to do now is share what we see as the 3 primary drivers for building custom data experiences that you can think about and use to determine whether you have audiences or use cases where data experiences is a good fit. The first driver is data storytelling. Good stories blend narrative and tone to land an emotional connection, and data stories are similar in that they apply user flow and visual design. So what you're seeing here is a global analytics portal for a fashion brand that's designed to feel at home both within the company's org chart as well as the company's digital brand. It has a collection of dashboards with key KPIs, as well as some custom visualizations that overlay multiple interrelated dimensions to tell a cohesive story, like in this case, which tells a story about the impact of adverse weather events on the company's shipping operations. Okay, so what we just saw is really just reskinning Looker, but there's so much more we can do, which brings us to our second driver. The second driver is really geared towards delivering new analytical capabilities to end users. We can get more leverage from our data if we let users ask new categories of questions. So what I want to share with you is a customer segmentation app, or really it's a data segmentation app that 4Mile has built. And you can see that it's really built to look and feel a lot like Looker's native Explorer experience. Because this is a Looker extension application, it's meant to extend the capabilities that Looker has natively. So I'm going to go ahead and build up a query that's going to answer the question about what are my top 25 categories with average gross margin by category. Basic stuff Looker already does out of the box. But what's new here is my segments tab, which allows me to create, save, share, and edit canonical segments. So these are the customer segments that are kind of most important for my business to understand, and I can apply these to any number of queries. So defining a segment is really just creating a collection of filters. In this case, older Floridians are people greater than 65, where their state is Florida. I can select this, and let's go ahead and run the query. We're going to give it a second to land. And now that I've applied these segments to my query that I just showed you, I can now see that in the suits category, for example, the average gross margin for older Floridians is much higher than that for younger Floridians. And what's cool about this is we're really just remixing Looker's objects. There's no third-party systems involved here. Okay, so that's pretty cool, but there's a lot of examples where we want to bring data into other systems because our users live in lots of systems, not just Looker. So that brings us to our third driver, which is to operationalize analytics within business workflows. Quite simply, these are experiences that are designed to make it easier for users to act on the analytical insights. What I'm showing you here is really just an example of an application that we built for a wealth management firm, where a financial advisor can create a collection of highly polished contemporary decks. And when they're ready to go in the field, they would apply a couple filters, select a client ID and a portfolio ID. And as a result of just a couple of clicks, they can generate a data-rich portfolio deck that they can come out to the field and wow their customers with it. So you can see that there's really a vast range of possibilities for data experiences. And because there's such a broad canvas, we find that these projects work best when there's a champion who brings a product ownership mindset to the task. We really have to start with a good understanding of who's the product's target audience, what's that audience's core needs, what's the problem or pain point that the product's going to address, and finally, how must it be designed such that it's functional, reliable, usable, and comfortable for that audience. So we sometimes launch data projects, data experience projects with a design sprint to address these questions and determine if and how a custom data experience is going to add value. I want to note that this is a Google-inspired process that we've adapted for our purposes. In essence, a design sprint is a tightly structured, 1 or 2 week activity that starts with a high-level business problem and results in a high-fidelity prototype that's actually tested with end users or a good proxy. So at the end of a design sprint, we've got prototypes, customer feedback, and we can begin to understand whether the product's viable, what it's going to take to deliver, and where to begin. Okay, so let's imagine now we've committed to building a data experience. The next task at hand is to figure out how to make it happen. So what I'm going to share with you in this section of the agenda is to describe a conceptual architecture for building data experiences. In fact, this is an architecture that's really geared towards organizations where data experiences are core to their analytics strategy, where leadership is driving towards having a collection of experiences for diverse use cases and audiences. This pattern gives leverage to a mid-sized team or larger, and maybe even multiple teams focused on a common problem space. If you have a case where you have just one very narrow situation where a data experience might be relevant, then you can come up with a much lighter weight architecture than what I'm going to share with you here. So to anchor this architecture, I want to describe some of the use cases that really inspired its development. Again, we worked with a Fortune 100 retailer who had a very long list of diverse use cases. Like, they wanted to be able to surface Looker-backed analytics within the same application as their legacy BI solution. They wanted to power a data-driven newsfeed, kind of like 538.com. They wanted to let users create an annotated query history where they could make notes about what they were seeing in the behavior of different analytics. They wanted to let users create all kinds of different content, blending Looker and other sources. They wanted a streamlined drag-and-drop data exploration experience. And finally, what's really exciting is they wanted content that was wired for action. Like, for example, a table that's got a button which says make a purchase order. So this might be an example of a microsite that they would build using this framework. This is a fashion-oriented customer segmentation app that we're going to come back to later in the presentation. So there's a lot of options for building custom data experiences within Looker, and what we're going to be focusing on in this presentation is how to accomplish that using Looker's APIs and extension framework, which offers the broadest range of creative possibilities for building data experiences. Okay, so when we talk about architecture, we want to think about what are the values that our system should produce, and they often sound like ilities. And in this case, we're going to be building a system that includes composability, reusability, usability, and stability. These are the software quality attributes that are going to span across multiple functionalities in our system. So in our case, our focus is really on building modular components that can be mixed and matched, combined and recombined like Lego blocks to produce engaging and trusted data experiences rapidly. So thinking about our architecture, we need to have a home. We need to understand the home for our architecture. And through the course of building a lot of data experiences for a wide range of clients across different sectors, we find that they all kind of share this general pattern. The data experience is going to let a user ask a question. The system is going to take that question and apply some business logic to analyze it. And then next, it's going to surface some answer to that question in the form of an insight. And then finally, often is the case that the user wants to be able to take action. And so, this is a conceptual architecture, or I guess a domain description for our architecture with respect to the business purpose. If we come down a click and think about the technical domain for architecture, we begin to see words emerge that are much more like what you might find even in Looker's APIs itself. We're composing queries, we're executing queries, we're visualizing queries, and we're taking action often vis-a-vis third-party APIs. Okay, so now we have some language, and I think we can really take these words to organize modules and use that to organize our system. So let's do that. The first module we're going to talk about is our Query Builder module. The Query Builder module has widgets that are fundamentally geared towards helping users express an analytical question. They could include widgets that let users pick filters, set fields, apply sorts. They can be open-ended or hard-coded. The hard-coded example is one where you might find this on top of a map that lets somebody select the right geographic dimension and have that result in changing the values that are displayed on the map. You might have a more dynamic field picker widget, which would take metadata in about the whole range of fields on an explorer, and maybe even multiple explorers, and let the user pick and choose which fields they want to apply to a given query. Or you can take it a couple steps further and have something like this natural language processing example, which lets users express an open-ended question in plain English, like what's the average gross margin for the top 25 brands? That would result in a query with fields, filters, pivots, and sorts, and all kinds of stuff. What's important here is that all of these widgets share a common interface so that you can plug and play them in a bunch of different use cases. Now, once somebody's formed a question, the next leg in our journey is going to be to have the system make an attempt at answering the question. So now we're going to introduce the idea of a service layer, the next module in our system. The service layer at this point is going to have two concerns. There's all of the boring stuff that every application has, like caching, authorization, session management, and stuff of that nature. But then, I think more pointedly to our talk today is it's going to publish actions that perform analytical workflows. Some of those workflows might result in just one-to-one calls to Looker, like running a query. But we could also find that there's going to be more complex workflows that are going to maybe execute multiple queries, compose some SQL, and pass that to the SQL runner. So next, when a query comes back, often is the case that the user is going to want to see the results somehow. So now we're going to introduce the idea of a visualizer module. Similar to the query builder, each visualizer in our module really should have uniform contracts so that you can mix and match these visualizers throughout your application or applications. The visualizer module is going to have, it could have your common visualizations like pies, lines, tables. It could have more esoteric visualizations like swarm plots, network plots, and so forth. Or you could dream up visualizations that are completely unique to your business. So what's important, though, is all of these visualizers basically take in kind of the same inputs. It's going to take a Looker query payload. And the visualizer itself should have a point of view about what do I do with dimensions, what do I do with measures. Maybe it'll have a point of view about other pieces that Looker payload, like field types, labels, and things of that nature. It's going to have a configuration that's applied, maybe some basic presentational aspects like the font choice, font size, but also some data-bound considerations like there are some visualizations like the network viz, for example, that expresses a parent-child relationship. So your configuration is going to be able to determine which field defines that parent-child relationship for a given query. And then finally, we've got click handlers. As we've been alluding to throughout the presentation, we want to let our users take action on the data that they're seeing. So if your components have a common interface, it really opens the door to building a library of components that can be viewed, and then developers, designers, and product owners have a common ground by which to decide what's the right visualization for this particular use case. You can select from all the different options in your menu, and you can even take a step further. So you can see here, right now, I'm choosing a different query payload to make sure that I've got the right data parameters for this pie chart. Now I've got the right data parameters, I'm going to begin fiddling some of the different visual aspects of my pie chart, adjusting arcs and things like that. I can come down here and toggle the inner radius. And finally, I don't love the colors, so let's go ahead and change the new color palette to something a little bit with more contrast. So what's cool here is I can now come over to the Code tab, And within this playground, I can literally just copy and paste all of my code, have my component totally configured. I can drop this code into my application. And now I've got my stock pie chart for this particular use case. And you can see here, as I change this inner radius, it's actually changing that value. So it's not a big leap going from here to exposing these as form elements that your end user can adjust themselves. Now finally, I just want to demonstrate that all of these visualizations are already wired for clicks, which means I can take action on them elsewhere throughout my application. Okay, so now that a user's been able to visualize their insight, they want to be able to interact with it, which means they're going to want to take action. So now we're going to extend our service layer so that it publishes actions that lets them do things in their business, like create orders, create articles, save segments, and the like. You know, what's interesting here is these related actions that are exposed in the application are often going to be powered by other APIs, other internal APIs that are owned by the business, or maybe third-party APIs in cloud-based software. Usually we're going to pass something that Looker returns into these actions. In the case of composing a data article, I might actually pass my query configuration to a content management system so that other users can read the article and see the most up-to-date information related to that article. I might pass the query results into another API. Like if my data article wants to talk about what happened today in the world of my business. Or it might pass a subset of those query results. Like if I want to be able to place an order, it might just take the SKUs out of my query results payload and send those to an order API. So I want to note that in our experience working with this Fortune 100 client, we gained a lot of mileage from using an API generator. In this case, we were really focused on content management. A lot of the use cases were content management related. So we used this open source content management system called Strapi, which let us spin up new APIs very, very rapidly and connect collections of different objects together so that we could have a rich experience. So let's bring it all together. What we see here now is in the middle, we've got our service layer sitting there. It's taking in actions in the form of do some kind of analysis, run a query from the query builder. Those actions to perform analysis are almost always going to pass through an API gateway into a Looker API, which returns data back, which the service layer is going to pass into our visualizer module, where our user sees the results. They click on something because they want something to happen based on those results, which emits an action back in the service layer that then calls into one of our third-party APIs. Okay, so let's now think about how we might apply this conceptual architecture to compose a use case. And what we're going to do is referring back to the fashion segmentation microsite that I showed you earlier in the presentation. You can see here that I've taken the widgets that we've described throughout the presentation and mixed and matched them to build this page. I've got green widgets, which are my query builders. I've got blue widgets, which are my visualizers. And then I have orange widgets, which are my actions. You can see how I can take them together to build this fashion customer segmentation microsite, but I could also build a lot of other things like this. Okay, so finally, the key takeaway is what we learned by applying this approach with our client and several other clients since then. The lessons learned are first and foremost, Looker gives you a huge lift on the data side. So when we're talking about building data experiences, we really should be emphasizing on the experience part of the equation, which means starting with product ownership and user experience first and foremost. Secondly, we gain a lot of mileage by building a component sandbox, which has code samples and lets people interact with their components, which lets developers, designers, and product owners kind of think about what's available and how can I compose what I've already built to make a new experience. Those component libraries really should be focused on kind of stock configuration-only components. We should save the bespoke functionality, the highly customized components, and let those live on the side as custom components. I would highly encourage you to use API generators wherever you can. Why rebuild something you can get for free? And finally, let's take a modular approach to building our service layer so that we can interact with our data in all kinds of novel ways as we build up a range of different use cases. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for participating in this session. Stay healthy, Please feel free to email me if you want to discuss any of these subjects, and I hope to see you at Join next year.